My phone rang at exactly 4:17 a.m. My son's voice shook. Dad, Mom died an hour ago. The lawyer says the house and every account are mine now. You have 3 days to move out. I didn't answer. I stared into the darkness of my bedroom, listening. 35 years as a federal judge taught me one thing: grief never sounds rehearsed. 5 hours later, I stood over my wife's body at the funeral home and smiled. The woman wearing her wedding ring wasn't my wife. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to question someone close to you, yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today. Quick note, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes. What matters most is the message it carries. The phone shattered the 4:17 a.m. silence with a violence that felt deliberate, and I knew before answering that nothing about this call would be coincidence. I am Warren Bennett, 72 years old, former federal appellate judge, retired 4 years ago after 35 years on the bench. The kind of man who notices when someone calls at 4:17 a.m. instead of a rounder number. The kind who knows that precision often masks rehearsal. My son's voice came through the line with a tremor that signaled fear, not grief. Dad, Mom died last night, stroke, 4:00 a.m. at sunrise. Brent Bennett, 59 years old, private wealth advisor, drowning in debt his mother and I weren't supposed to know about. Speaking now in the careful cadence of a man reading from a script someone else had written. I said nothing. 35 years on the bench taught me that the person talking the most is the person most afraid. It was peaceful. Brent continued, the words tumbling faster. The staff said she didn't suffer. They called me at 4:03. I've been trying to process it, but I needed to tell you right away. 4 minutes to call me after receiving the news himself. I looked at the phone screen's glow in my dark Georgetown bedroom. Frances Bennett, my wife of 46 years, 69 years old, supposedly dead of a stroke 17 minutes ago, had always hated the word peaceful. She used to say it was what people called deaths they didn't want to examine too closely. I understand, I said, my only words so far. Brent exhaled a sound like relief, and I filed that away too. Relief is not the breath pattern of grief. Dad, we need to talk about the house. There it was. The reason for the 4:17 a.m. call. Not to share sorrow. Not to plan a funeral. To claim property while I was still disoriented by the shock that any normal 72-year-old widower would be experiencing. The will from 2010 leaves everything to me, Brent said. The Georgetown house, the accounts, all of it. You have 3 days to make arrangements. 3 days, not a week. Not a month. Not even the courtesy of waiting until after the funeral. 3 days delivered with the unnatural precision of a coached witness. The estate attorney says you need to sign the release forms by Friday, he continued. I've already contacted a moving company. They're very efficient, very compassionate about these situations. Compassionate. I sat on the edge of my bed, in the dark, motionless, listening to my son recite lines from a script written by someone who thought a 72-year-old retired judge would be too broken by grief to recognize performance. The person who wrote this script had never sat in my courtroom, had never watched me dismantle coached testimony with silence. It's my house now, Dad. Mom made her decision years ago. Mom, not mother. Mom, the diminutive meant to soften the cruelty of evicting your father before your mother's body was cold. I absorbed the detail the way I used to absorb inconsistencies in appellate briefs. The tremor in his voice wasn't grief. It was guilt compounded by fear. Why call at 4:17 a.m. when the death occurred at 4:00, who needs 17 minutes to rehearse a script? The question hung in the air between us, unspoken. Brent filled the silence with more words, talking faster now, his composure cracking at the edges. I'll text you the moving company contact. They're expecting your call. And Dad, I'm sorry. I really am. But this is what Mom wanted. What Mom wanted. As if Frances, a woman who spent 30 years as a prosecutor before her own retirement, who never made a decision without examining it from 6 angles, would draft a will leaving her husband of nearly 5 decades homeless with 72 hours' notice. I let the silence stretch. Let it become uncomfortable. Let Brent hear his own breathing in the void where a father's grief should have been. Might I have to go? He said abruptly. There's a lot to arrange. I'll call you later about the funeral. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness for 2 full minutes, the phone still in my hand, my heartbeat steady and slow. The initial shock had evaporated within seconds of hearing Brent's voice. What replaced it was the cold clarity I used to feel when an appellee's brief contained one sentence too many. The sentence that revealed the entire argument was constructed on a lie. The silence after Brent hung up felt heavier than any verdict I had ever delivered from the bench. I stood, walked through the dark hallway to my study without turning on lights. My feet knew this house the way my hands knew the weight of a gavel. 43 years in this Georgetown row house. Every floorboard's creak, every window's rattle in October wind. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. The leather-bound notebook sat exactly where I'd placed it 4 years ago on my last day at the courthouse. Black leather brass corners, the kind of binding that improves with age. I'd used notebooks like this throughout my career, one per major case, methodical documentation of evidence timelines, inconsistencies. The habit of a judge who believed that truth revealed itself to those patient enough to document every detail. I hadn't opened this one since retirement. Hadn't needed to. The federal appellate bench doesn't follow you home. But Frances's voice echoed in my memory from a conversation 6 months ago. Her words careful and deliberate. If something ever feels wrong, Warren, not sad, not unfortunate, but wrong, you'll know what to do. At the time, I'd thought she meant estate planning, updating our wills, the practical concerns of a 69-year-old woman ensuring her affairs were in order. Now, standing in my dark study with my son's scripted performance still ringing in my ears, I understood she'd been preparing me for this. I carried the notebook back to my bedroom, sat at the small desk by the window where the first gray light of October dawn was beginning to seep through the curtains. Opened to the first blank page, the leather binding crackling softly, a sound like muscle memory, like the notebook remembered what it was built for. I dated the entry in the upper right corner, October 14th, 2023, 4:17 a.m. Then I wrote the first line in the handwriting that had authored 1,000 judicial opinions, careful and precise. Evidence log day 1. The pen didn't shake. I filled 3 pages before sunrise. Date, time, exact phrasing, timeline inconsistencies. The 17-minute gap. Brent's rehearsed precision. By the time Georgetown streets began their morning rhythm, I had documented everything. 5 hours later, I stood under harsh fluorescent lighting at Gentry and Associates' funeral home, staring at a body on a metal table. The woman was wearing Frances's wedding ring, and that was the first thing that told me it wasn't my wife. The funeral attendant, a soft-voiced man in his 60s, stood by the door, giving me space to grieve. He didn't realize he was witnessing a federal judge documenting evidence. Brent and his wife Roxanne stood 2 steps behind me. I could feel their presence. Brent's breathing shallow and fast. Roxanne's controlled, measured. Watching. Roxanne Harrington, 41 years old, real estate attorney, former Department of Justice intern who'd spent 3 years in civil fraud before private practice. Brent had married her 7 years ago. Now she stood watching every movement I made, unaware that I'd already detected her conspiracy in the space of 40 seconds. I looked at the ring, gold band inscription barely visible. I didn't need to read it. I'd engraved it myself. 2/14/1979, Valentine's Day. The ring was correct. The date matched. Even the wear pattern aligned with 4 decades of daily use. But the left ring finger lacked the crescent-shaped scar from a kitchen accident in 1987. A knife slip while julienning carrots 4 stitches at Georgetown University Hospital, a permanent mark that caught lamplight when she reached for things. I'd traced that scar with my thumb 10,000 times. This woman's finger was smooth. I said nothing. Stood perfectly still for 40 seconds, long enough to make Roxanne shift her weight, long enough for Brent to clear his throat nervously. "Take your time, Mr. Bennett," the attendant said gently. "Dad, are you okay?" Brent's voice carried manufactured concern. "We can step out if—" "No," I said. I studied the body methodically. Height approximately correct. Age roughly appropriate. Hair color matched Francis's natural gray-brown. Someone had prepared this substitution with meticulous attention to visible details, but they'd missed the scar. The intimate detail only a husband of 46 years would know. The attendant extended a clipboard. "The paperwork needs a signature here and here." I took the pen. Signed Warren Bennett in the careful script I'd used on 1,000 judicial opinions. Confirming that yes, this was Frances Eleanor Bennett, my wife deceased. I was signing a document I knew to be false. Why sign a false identification? Why not expose the fraud immediately and call authorities? Because whoever orchestrated this expected a grief-stricken 72-year-old man to crumble. If I revealed what I'd noticed now, they would know I was hunting them. Better to let them believe their performance had succeeded. Better to smile. I turned from the table and looked directly at Roxanne. Let my mouth curve into the smile I used to wear when witnesses hanged themselves on the stand without knowing it. The smile that meant I'd caught the lie and was already 3 moves ahead. Roxanne didn't recognize the danger. She met my eyes with something like relief. "We should discuss the house timeline, Dad," she said, not waiting even until we'd left the morgue. "Not here," I said, flat tone. Brent looked confused, glancing between his wife and me like he sensed something wrong, but couldn't identify what. We left through the side entrance. I drove myself to Bethesda. Sunrise Recovery Center occupied a renovated colonial building, the kind of facility that charged premium rates for what they called compassionate transitional care. Frances had checked herself in 6 weeks ago for routine monitoring after a minor health scare. I'd visited twice a week. Now Brent had demanded I collect her belongings. Colleen Walsh met me in the hallway outside room 14. 38 years old night nurse with dark hair pulled into a practical bun. She watched me with a careful gaze that wasn't sympathy, it was evaluation. The look of someone carrying a dangerous secret and assessing whether I was sharp enough to be trusted with it. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Judge Bennett," she said, measured tone. "Her belongings are in room 14. Take your time." Dr. Gerald Marsh appeared from the staff office, 55, attending physician, silver-haired, with smooth bedside manner. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Judge Bennett." She was comfortable, peaceful. There was that word again. Peaceful. The word people used for deaths they didn't want examined closely. "If you need anything signed, I'm available," he added, too polished. Like an actor who'd forgotten how real grief sounds. I nodded once, entered room 14 alone. The green coat hung in the small closet. Frances's favorite wool blend, slightly worn at the cuffs. I folded it carefully, sleeves first, then lengthwise, then in half. I felt the paper in the pocket as I smoothed the fabric. I didn't remove it there. Didn't give the ceiling cameras the satisfaction of capturing my reaction. Packed the coat with her other things. Toiletries. 2 paperback mysteries. Reading glasses. Colleen watched from the hallway as I left. Our eyes met for half a second. She gave the smallest nod, Allie confirmed. I drove to the parking lot's far corner, locked the car doors. Only then did I open the coat and reach into the right pocket. The paper was small, torn from a prescription pad. 3 words in blue ink, the handwriting from 46 years of breakfast notes left on the kitchen counter. You are right. I sat in the locked car, holding the note, my breathing steadying for the first time since the 4:17 a.m. call. 3 words written before she disappeared. 3 words that meant Frances had seen this coming, had orchestrated her own vanishing, had known I would stand in this exact parking lot holding this exact coat, had known I would do what I'd spent 35 years doing from the federal bench, follow the evidence wherever it led. The note sat on my study desk while I worked. 3 words in Frances's handwriting, confirmation that she'd seen this coming and trusted me to follow the evidence. By 10 p.m., I'd laid out 46 years of financial documents across the mahogany surface the way I once laid out evidence for federal appeals, chronologically, categorically, and with the absolute certainty that someone had made a mistake I would find. I started with the joint checking account. Frances and I had maintained separate professional accounts during our careers, but shared this one for household expenses. Groceries, utilities, the predictable rhythm of a long marriage. Except the rhythm had changed 8 months ago. I pulled out a yellow legal pad, the kind I'd used throughout my judicial career, and began creating a timeline. Each withdrawal received its own line. Date, amount, location. The pattern emerged within 20 minutes. $340,000. Drained over 8 months through exactly 40 withdrawals. I did the calculation twice to be certain. Average withdrawal, $8,500. Not one exceeded $10,000. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent study. The Federal Bank Secrecy Act requires financial institutions to file suspicious activity reports for cash transactions over $10,000. It's basic anti-money laundering law, the kind of regulation every prosecutor and defense attorney knows by heart. Someone had structured these thefts to stay precisely under the SAR threshold. Brent's signature appeared on every withdrawal slip I'd requested copies from the bank that afternoon, citing estate settlement procedures. But the power of attorney dated back 11 months, signed by Frances and naming Roxanne as her legal representative for all financial matters. Roxanne could have stopped the withdrawals, could have flagged the pattern, could have called me. Instead, she'd orchestrated it. Who sits down and calculates 40 withdrawals at $8,500 each, staying precisely under the federal trigger unless they've spent years learning how to exploit the exact gaps in the law. I wrote in my notebook, someone knows federal banking law. Roxanne had spent 3 years prosecuting financial crimes at DOJ. She knew the SAR thresholds, knew exactly how to dismantle a couple's savings without triggering a single automated alert. The calculator buttons clicked softly in the silence as I verified the math again. $340,000. The Georgetown house was worth perhaps $750,000 in the current market. Frances's pension and mine together provided adequate income. We weren't wealthy by DC standards, but we'd been comfortable. Now nearly half our liquid assets were gone, and my son had signed every withdrawal. I closed the notebook at 11:47 p.m., set my alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow I would visit the lawyer whose name appeared on Brent's hurried text, Keith Webb, estate attorney, DuPont Circle. The name meant nothing to me then. I arrived at Keith Webb's office at 8:30 a.m. sharp. Modern building glass and steel, the kind of address that announces success. His suite occupied the 7th floor with windows overlooking the circle. He stood when I entered. 48 years old, tailored charcoal suit, expensive watch, the polished appearance of a man who'd built a profitable practice. Extended his hand across the desk. Judge Bennett, I'm so sorry for your loss. I shook his hand. Sat in the client chair without responding to the condolences. He cleared his throat. Pulled a blue folder from his desk drawer. This is the will your wife executed on September 22nd. Everything is properly notarized. September 22nd, 3 weeks before her supposed death. I opened the folder. The estate distribution structure is straightforward, Webb continued. Primary residence and liquid assets transfer to your son Brent, with provisions for— I raised my hand. The gesture I'd used in courtroom for 35 years to command silence without speaking. Witnesses stopped mid-sentence when I made that motion. So did attorneys. Webb stopped. Sir, I can explain the estate distribution structure if— I kept my hand raised. He closed his mouth. I read the will with judicial slowness. 1 page every 90 seconds. Let the silence stretch. Let Webb shift in his expensive chair, adjust his tie, clear his throat twice. The document was professionally drafted. Proper legal language. Correct Maryland probate formatting. Francis's signature at the bottom of page 6 looked authentic. I'd need a handwriting expert to be certain, but the forger had done competent work. Then I reached page 4, paragraph 2, clause 7. When all liquid assets currently held in joint accounts shall transfer to Brent Michael Bennett, hereinafter referred to as the primary beneficiary, with full authority to— I stopped reading, stared at the phrase— hereinafter referred to as the primary beneficiary, capitalized. Structured exactly as I'd taught it. The phrase I'd invented in 1987 when drafting a particularly complex trust opinion, an archaism I'd maintained throughout my career because it created useful legal precision. I drilled it into every law clerk who worked for me over 18 years, including the man sitting across this desk. I looked up, really looked at Keith Webb for the first time since entering his office. Saw past the expensive suit and the silver threading his hair. Saw the younger man who'd sat 3 meters from my chamber's desk for 6 years, starting in 1998. Who'd learned appellate procedure and evidence law, and apparently how to forge documents using the exact syntax his mentor had taught him. Worse than the theft was seeing my own language staring back at me from forged documents, like teaching someone to write, then watching them forge your signature with the pen you gave them. Keith, I said. First time I'd used his first name. No question mark. Yes, sir. The nervousness in his voice confirmed what the phrase had already told me. He recognized the shift in my tone. Recognized that I'd caught something. Didn't know yet what I'd caught. I folded the will closed, set it on his desk. Let the silence extend until he started to speak. Judge Bennett, if there are any questions about the— I'll be in touch, I said. Stood. Left his office. Took the elevator down 7 floors while my heart rate stayed perfectly steady. Keith Webb. Not just Brent's lawyer, my former law clerk. The man I'd mentored, taught, recommended for partnership at his firm. The phrase on page 4 wasn't evidence. It was a signature written in legal language only 2 people in the world would recognize as my invention. I drove from Webb's office directly to Arlington. Keith Webb could wait. I'd already documented his fingerprint in syntax. Now I needed to understand how deep Brent's involvement ran. The jacket was hanging on the kitchen chair like an afterthought. Expensive cashmere Brent-size pockets, heavy with the kind of receipts men who owe millions shouldn't be carrying. Brent had invited me to discuss the Georgetown house transfer timeline. His voice on the phone that morning had carried the forced casualness of someone trying to appear reasonable. Come by at 3. We'll sort out the details. I arrived at his Arlington home precisely on time. Suburban, split-level, modest by DC standards, but beyond what a wealth advisor drowning in debt should be maintaining. The lawn needed mowing. Paint peeling on the shutters. Vivian answered the door. 16 years old, my granddaughter with Brent's curly dark hair and something in her eyes that reminded me of Francis' careful observation, masked as teenage distraction. She nodded once in acknowledgement, no words, then returned to the dining table where calculus homework spread across the surface in the methodical arrangement of someone who documented everything precisely. Dad, Grandpa's here, she called toward the kitchen. Brent emerged, wiping his hands on a dish towel manufacturing hospitality. Dad, thanks for coming. We need to finalize the transfer schedule. I nodded. Followed him into the kitchen. Noted the jacket on the chair immediately, but didn't look at it directly. Coffee? Brent asked, already reaching for the pot. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen and something shifted in his expression. Fear. Or maybe resignation. Sorry, I have to take this. Work emergency. He grabbed the phone, gestured toward the coffee pot. Help yourself. I'll just be a minute. He stepped through the sliding door into the backyard, already talking in low, urgent tones I couldn't hear through the glass. I poured coffee I didn't want. Glanced at Vivian. She was focused on her calculus pencil, moving in careful strokes. Glanced through the window at Brent, pacing across the October brown grass, one hand pressed to his ear, the other gesturing sharply. I checked the jacket pocket. The receipt was folded, once creased but not worn. First Caribbean International Bank, Grand Cayman. Dated 8 months prior, the same month the systematic withdrawals from our joint account had begun. Transaction summary, $120,000. USD transferred to account number ending 4472, registered holder V. Harrington. Not Roxanne Bennett. Not Roxanne Harrington Bennett. V. Harrington. Her maiden name. I photographed the receipt with my phone. 2 shots to ensure clarity. Replaced it in the exact position, same fold, same pocket. Brent's name appeared nowhere on the document. My son owed someone, probably multiple someone's, $3.8 million. I'd seen the debt collection notices he thought he'd hidden from Francis and me, the letters he'd dismissed as temporary cash flow problems when confronted. Now he was helping dismantle his parents' savings to save himself, except his wife had already siphoned a portion of the theft into an offshore account that listed only her name. The money stolen from Brent's own parents' money he desperately needed to pay his debts was being hidden from him by the woman orchestrating the theft. Some betrayals happened in parallel without the betrayers even knowing. I stood in my son's kitchen holding coffee I hadn't tasted, watching him pace in the backyard with his phone pressed against his ear like a lifeline. Vivian's pencil scratched softly against paper behind me. Brent returned 10 minutes later, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We discussed transfer timelines. I nodded in appropriate places. Agreed to unreasonable demands. Left at 3:47 p.m. I didn't think about the Cayman receipt again until Wednesday night, 2 days later. Day 3 since the 4:17 a.m. call. I sat in my dark Georgetown bedroom at 9 p.m. with the desk lamp off, waiting, without knowing exactly what for. The phone vibrated at 9:04 p.m. Unknown number, no caller ID. I answered on the second ring. Said nothing. Silence. Then breathing. Steady, controlled, the rhythm of someone who'd learned how to regulate their respiration through decades of courtroom testimony. I counted. 18 breaths per minute. Calm. Not panicked. Not rushed. I said nothing, just listened. The breathing continued. No background noise. No ambient sound. Just the measured inhale and exhale of someone on the other end of the line waiting. 47 seconds. Then the call ended. I sat in the darkness, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to dead air. The silence on the phone wasn't absence of communication. It was the densest kind of conversation 2 people could have after 46 years. Each breath a sentence, each second a paragraph. Frances had one specific habit when she needed to discuss something serious, but was uncertain how to begin. She would call my chambers later, my cell phone, wait for me to answer, then wait for me to speak first. The silence gave her time to gauge my mood from my tone, to decide how to proceed based on whether I sounded receptive or distracted or irritated. She'd been doing it for 46 years. Since we were both young lawyers trying to navigate difficult conversations about career choices and family planning, and whether to buy the Georgetown house we couldn't quite afford, the breathing pattern matched. 18 respirations per minute, the rate she maintained when thinking carefully when calculating her next move. I'd watched her testify as a prosecutor for 30 years. Knew that rhythm like I knew my own heartbeat. I opened my notebook. Wrote in the careful judicial script. Wednesday, October 16th, 9:04 p.m. 47 seconds. Respiratory rate 18 minimum calm. Frances. Only she breathed that specific pattern when calculating next moves. I looked up at the Georgetown ceiling, allowing myself the first slow exhale since the 4:17 a.m. call 3 days ago. Let the breath leave my lungs completely before drawing the next one. She was alive. She had orchestrated her disappearance, and the breathing pattern 47 seconds of weighted silence told me she was waiting. Not to be rescued, not to be saved. She was waiting for me to do what I'd spent 35 years doing from the federal bench, build an ironclad case before making the accusation. "You are alive," I whispered to the empty room. "And you are waiting for me to do the right thing." Thursday, I documented the Wednesday call in my notebook. Date, time, duration, respiratory rate. Evidence that Frances was alive and coordinating from wherever she'd hidden herself. Friday afternoon, I went looking for more. I found Vivian exactly where I'd hoped not to, sitting on a wooden bench at Dumbarton Oaks Park, with a leather diary open on her lap, writing in the methodical cursive that meant she was documenting something she thought mattered. The October afternoon cast golden light through the maple trees. Yellow leaves collecting around the bench where my 16-year-old granddaughter sat creating evidence against her own parents without knowing it. She looked up as I approached. Closed the diary partially, not hiding it, but marking her place. "Judge Bennett," she said. "Not Grandpa. Judge Bennett." The formal address she'd used since age 10 after watching one of my appellate rulings broadcast on C-SPAN during a middle school civics project. She'd asked me afterward why I'd reversed the lower court, and when I explained the evidentiary reasoning, she'd nodded with the same serious expression she wore now. "Vivian," I said, "what are you writing?" She looked down at the diary. The same leather-bound journal I'd given her for her 10th birthday, now filled with 6 years of daily entries. The leather showed wear at the corners, the spine creased from constant opening. Just things I heard. Things I thought I should remember. I sat on the bench beside her. Didn't ask permission, didn't rush. Just sat the way I used to sit on this bench, waiting for attorneys to stop shuffling papers and start making their arguments. "What kind of things?" I asked. "Conversations," she said, uncertain whether to share. Looking at me with the careful assessment of someone deciding whether trust was warranted. "Arguments mostly, between Mom and Dad." I kept my face neutral. The judicial mask that revealed nothing. "Tell me about the most recent one," I said. Not a request. A gentle command. She opened the diary to a page marked with a ribbon, scanned her own handwriting, made a decision. October 3rd, 2 weeks ago. They were arguing behind their bedroom door around 9 p.m. I was in the hallway. I'd gone upstairs to get my phone charger from the bathroom. October 3rd. 11 days before the 4:17 a.m. call. 11 days before Frances's supposed death. "What were they arguing about?" I asked. And Dad kept saying the Georgetown house over and over, like he was trying to convince Mom of something. And Mom said, she paused, checking her notes, "Before she recovers enough to sign anything." That's verbatim, Judge. I wrote it down immediately. "Before she recovers enough to sign anything, Frances." 2 weeks before her supposed death, Roxanne was already planning to move against our assets, already worried that Frances would recover from whatever medical issue had landed her in Sunrise Recovery Center. Already constructing the timeline for theft. "What exactly did your mother say?" I asked. Her exact words. Vivian turned the diary toward me slightly. Her handwriting filled the page in neat rows. October 3rd, 2023, 9:07 p.m. Location upstairs hallway outside parents' bedroom. Dad's voice tense, saying, "The Georgetown house," repeatedly. Mom's voice cold, controlled. "We move on it before she recovers enough to sign anything. Keith has the documents ready." Dad, "What if Warren contests Mom? He's 72. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." I read it twice, committed every word to memory. "You write down everything you overhear?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not everything. Only things that feel wrong or important. I've been doing it since you gave me this diary. You said documentation creates clarity. I'd said that 6 years ago, explaining to a 10-year-old why judges took such careful notes during trials, why written records mattered more than memory. The girl sitting beside me, documenting her parents' conspiracy, had no idea she was creating evidence that might destroy her family. She just thought she was doing what I'd taught her, pay attention to details. "This is very detailed," I said. "Careful neutrality. Date, time, location, exact quotes. That's excellent practice." "I always write it down immediately," she said, "while I still remember exactly. Sometimes I'll hear something weeks later and realize it was important, but by then the details are fuzzy. This way everything's preserved. Preserved. Contemporary documentation. Chain of custody. Evidentiary integrity. This wasn't teenage journaling. This was witness testimony recorded in real time, admissible in court." "Have you shown this to anyone?" I asked. Critical question. If she'd told Roxanne or Brent about the diary, they'd destroy it. If she'd mentioned it to friends, its security was compromised. "No one," Vivienne said. "It's private, always has been." "Where do you keep it?" "In my lockbox, under my bed. The one you gave me for my 13th birthday with the combination lock." I'd given her that lockbox specifically, so she'd have a secure place for important documents. Birth certificate. Social security card. Now it was protecting evidence of conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. What kind of grandfather asks his granddaughter to hide evidence from her own parents, knowing that protection now means prosecution later? I placed my hand on her shoulder, made direct eye contact. "Vivienne, I need you to listen carefully." She straightened. The same posture she'd adopted at age 10 when I explained appellate procedure. "Ready to receive instruction. Are you keeping this diary safe?" I asked. "Always, Judge, in my lockbox." "Good," I said. "I need you to continue keeping it safe. Don't show it to anyone, not your friends, not your teachers." I paused, made sure she understood the weight of the next words. "Not even your mother and father, especially not them." Her eyes widened slightly. She understood something significant was happening without understanding exactly what. "Why?" she asked. "Because I'm asking you to," I said. "Can you do that?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, Judge. And don't mention that we had this conversation. Not to anyone." Another nod. I squeezed her shoulder once, then released it. Stood from the bench. "Thank you, Vivienne." She closed the diary, held it against her chest like something precious. I walked away before she could ask more questions. Left her sitting under the maple tree in the golden afternoon light, clutching the evidence that would eventually testify against her father in ways she couldn't imagine yet. October 3rd, 9:10 p.m., before she recovers enough to sign anything. 11 days before the fake death. Roxanne had been planning the theft while Francis was still alive, still cognitive, still dangerous to the conspiracy, which meant Francis had known, which meant everything that followed the body swap, the silent Wednesday call, the note in her coat pocket, was Francis's counter-move. Francis had known about the conspiracy before her supposed death. Vivienne's diary proved it. Which meant everything that followed the body swap, the silent call, the note was Francis's carefully orchestrated response. That night I returned to the forged will for the third time, but now I was looking for what only a husband would see. The signature looked perfect, and that was exactly what proved it was forged. I spread the will across my Georgetown study desk under the yellow lamp at 8 p.m. Sixth and final page, Francis's signature in blue ink above the notary seal. Pulled out the magnifying glass I'd used during my judicial career to examine exhibits. Frances Eleanor Bennett. Her full name in the flowing script I'd watched her write on birthday cards and grocery lists and legal briefs for 46 years. The slant was correct. She favored a slight rightward lean, about 12 degrees. The pressure distribution matched. She wrote lightly on upstrokes, heavier on downstrokes. Even the distinctive capital E in Eleanor, her middle name, carried the proper curlicue at the peak. Technically perfect, fatally flawed. I traced the M with my fingertip. The line was smooth, unbroken, flawlessly steady from start to finish. Frances hadn't signed her name with a steady hand in 12 years. She'd developed essential tremor at age 65, the year we celebrated our 34th anniversary, the year she first asked me to steady her hand while signing birthday cards to Vivian. Mild but progressive, not debilitating, just present. A slight jitter visible in every signature she'd made since 2011, particularly at the tail of that distinctive capital B in Bennett, the letter she always finished with a slight downward hook. I opened the bottom desk drawer, pulled out our tax returns from the last decade, spread them beside the forged will. 2022, 2021, 2020. Every signature showed the same characteristic tremor. The M's tail wavered slightly before completing like a violin bow at the end of a long note. The forged will's M perfectly smooth. Keith Webb had watched Frances sign documents during his clerkship from 1998 to 2004, had studied her signature style, her letter formation, her distinctive flourishes. But he'd stopped paying attention when he left my chambers. Didn't know that Frances's hands had changed. Didn't know that age 65 had brought a physiological shift, visible only to someone who'd watched her sign 10,000 documents across a marriage. Only a husband would know that the tremor started the year they celebrated their 34th anniversary, the year she first needed him to steady her hand while signing birthday cards. The kind of intimacy that takes decades to build and seconds to weaponize as evidence. I photographed the forged signature beside the genuine tax signatures. Wrote in my notebook, "Forger new angle pressure slant. Missed physiological tremor. Didn't know her hands changed. Closed the notebook at 9:47 p.m. Tomorrow I would need help. 7 a.m. The next morning, I exited my Georgetown home for my habitual coffee shop walk. 4 years of retirement routine: wake at 6, shower, dress, walk. 6 blocks to the Wisconsin Avenue coffee shop, black coffee, Washington Post, crossword, return home. By 8:15, the man in the gray jacket stood at the end of my block again. Third consecutive morning. Same position. Same newspaper. Washington Post, same page held too long without his eyes actually moving across the text. Mid-40s patient stillness of someone paid by the hour. Private investigator hired to monitor my routine without realizing I'd cataloged his presence on day 1. I didn't alter my pace. Didn't glance his direction more than once. Same stride I'd maintained for 4 years. Same nod to Mrs. Patterson walking her terrier. Same turn onto Wisconsin Avenue. Roxanne had sent him. She was nervous. Good. The coffee shop's bell chimed as I pushed through the door. The barista looked up from the espresso machine, Georgetown University student who'd served me every morning for 2 years, memorized my order without ever knowing why precision mattered to a retired man. "Morning, Judge," the usual. "Oh, please," I said. "And the Post, if you have one." A counter by the register. I paid exact change, took my corner table by the window. The private investigator crossed the positioned himself at the bus stop with clear sightline to my table. I opened the post to the crossword. Appeared absorbed in one across. Let 45 minutes pass the way I had every morning for 4 years. How long does it take before being watched becomes as routine as breathing when you notice the watcher but refuse to give them the satisfaction of seeing you notice? Under the table, I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the contact saved as GC Bethesda, Garrett Callahan. 67 years old, retired federal investigator who'd worked the Watergate 2 cases, owed me favors from 3 decades of federal circuit coordination. The kind of man who knew how to pull surveillance files and make calls to people who still returned them. I typed 2 words without looking at the screen. Need help. Sent. Returned the phone to my pocket. Completed the crossword. 1 across 5 letters. Final evidence. Proof. 14. Down 9 letters. Systematic observation. Watching. I folded the paper with the same precise creases I'd used for 4 years. Placed exact change on the table, coffee plus 20% tip, same amount every morning. Stood at exactly 8 hours a.m. Have a good day, Judge, the barista called. You as well, I said. Walked out into the October morning. The PI across the street would note in his log, subject maintains routine, no deviation. Exactly what I needed him to report. By the time I reached my front door, Garrett Callahan had already received my text. Was already pulling surveillance files on Roxanne Harrington. Was already making calls to contacts at 3-letter agencies who still remembered when he'd helped them navigate jurisdictional nightmares during the federal corruption trials. Roxanne thought she was watching me. She'd just given me proof she was afraid. And fear, in my experience, meant mistakes were coming. Garrett's response came through by noon. On it. We'll have initial report by evening. 3 words that meant I wasn't alone anymore. By 2 p.m., I was at Georgetown Public Library, hunting for the woman whose body had been cremated in Francis's name. I sat at a microfiche terminal scrolling through October 2023 death records, hunting for a woman who died the same week as Francis, but never got claimed the real body in my wife's cremation urn. The library's basement archive smelled like old paper and cleaning solution. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. 3 other patrons worked at terminals scattered across the room, their faces lit by the glow of decades-old records. I started with October 9th, the day Francis supposedly died. Worked backward 1 day at a time. October 12th, 2 deaths, both male. October 11th, 1 death infant. October 10th, 3 deaths, all with family notifications listed. October 9th, Frances Eleanor Bennett, age 69, and 1 other. Eleanor Margaret Price, age 71. Resident Cedar Heights Recovery Center, Bethesda, Maryland. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. Cause cardiac arrest. Next of kin, none listed. I photographed the screen with my phone. Scrolled to the full record. No next of kin listed. Body transferred to county morgue, held for 72 hours per protocol, then released to Gentry and Associates Funeral Home for cremation as unclaimed remains. Eleanor Price had died at Cedar Heights, the same facility where Francis had been staying on October 9th. The night before the 4:17 a.m. call announcing Francis's death, I opened a second database on the adjacent terminal, Social Security Death Index cross-referenced with marriage and birth records. Typed Eleanor Margaret Price, born 1952. 3 results. Narrowed by date of death. 1 match. Marriage record 1974. Eleanor Margaret Price to Robert James Price, divorced 1982. 1 child from marriage, Patricia Ann Price, born 1976, current residence, Richmond, Virginia. Eleanor Price had a daughter living 90 miles south in Richmond, who was never notified that her mother had died. I photographed both screens. The death record listing no next of kin. The marriage record showing Patricia Price in Richmond. Someone had deliberately excluded Patricia from the death notification. Ensured Eleanor's body would remain unclaimed. Available. Attention library patrons. The PA system crackled. The library will be closing in 30 minutes. Please bring materials to the circulation desk. I glanced around. The other patrons were packing up, shutting down terminals, gathering coats. I had 30 minutes to photograph everything I might need. I worked faster. Pulled up Eleanor's admission records to Cedar Heights. Admitted September 1st, terminal lung cancer, no listed emergency contact. Pulled up Patricia Price's current address in Richmond, 1847 Monument Avenue property records, showing she'd owned the house since 2008. A daughter who owned property, who had a stable address, who should have been notified. But Frances needed an unclaimed body, needed someone who would disappear without questions. So Eleanor Price's daughter never got the call. I left the library at 4:52 p.m. with 43 photographs on my phone and the certainty that Frances had been planning this for months. The text came through at 9:17 p.m. Safeway lot, North Corner, now. Colleen Walsh's number. The nurse from Sunrise who'd watched me pack Frances's green coat with that careful, evaluating gaze. I drove to the Safeway parking lot 6 blocks from my house. Found Colleen standing beside a silver Honda in the far corner, under a broken streetlight, holding an envelope. She'd changed out of scrubs into jeans and a dark jacket. Looked both ways before approaching my car. Slid into the passenger seat without invitation. She told me you'd figure it out by now, Colleen said. No greeting. Straight to business. She handed me the envelope, thicker than the first note I'd found in the coat pocket. Frances recruited me in June, Colleen continued. 4 months before she checked into Sunrise. She knew what Roxanne was planning. Knew she needed someone on the inside who could coordinate. Coordinate what? I asked. The swap, Colleen said. Quiet. Direct. Eleanor Price was terminal. Had maybe 6 weeks when Frances approached her. They talked several times. Eleanor wanted her death to matter. Wanted it to mean something besides just ending. A shopping cart crashed into a nearby car, triggering its alarm. Both of us froze. Scanned the parking lot. Empty except for 2 cars near the entrance. Colleen waited until the alarm stopped. Eleanor consented. She said quieter now. Signed documents. Notarized. Frances has them secured. The plan was always that Eleanor would be cremated as Frances Bennett. That Frances would disappear until you had enough evidence to destroy Roxanne's conspiracy. The doctor, I said. Dr. Reeves signed the fraudulent death certificate. Why Roxanne blackmailed him, Colleen said. She had a file on a malpractice case from 2019. Bad outcomes patient died. Reeves made a judgment call that could be interpreted as negligence if someone wanted to destroy his career. Roxanne told them sign the certificate or she'd send the file to the medical board. She pulled her jacket tighter, glanced at the parking lot entrance again. Frances orchestrated everything from inside Cedar Heights, Colleen said. Used me as the external coordinator. Made sure Eleanor's body went to the right funeral home. Made sure the death certificate said Frances Bennett. Made sure you found what you needed to find. Why tell me this now? I asked. Because you have 7 days, Colleen said. Before they discover Eleanor, before someone checks too carefully and realizes the woman in the cremation urn isn't Frances Bennett. She opened the car door, paused. She's safe, Colleen said. And she's waiting for you to do what she knew you would do. Build the case. Expose them. Then she comes back. Colleen walked to her Honda without looking back. I opened the envelope fully. Found a second page behind Colleen's note. Frances's handwriting, a timeline in blue ink, dated entries starting in June. June 14th, contact Colleen Walsh. June 22nd, first meeting with Eleanor Price. July 8th, Eleanor signs consent documents. August 3rd. Confirm Dr. Reeves' vulnerability. September 1st. Admit to Cedar Heights. A starred notation at the bottom. Keith must never know about Patricia. My phone buzzed. Text from Garrett. Found Roxanne's car at Webb's office building. She's been there 90 minutes. Roxanne meeting with Webb for 90 minutes meant they knew I was moving. Meant they were scared. Good. Fear creates mistakes. I drove to Bethesda to see what Garrett had found. I pushed through the side door of Garrett's garage office to find the retired detective surrounded by printouts of Cayman banking records, a London Heathrow flight manifest, and surveillance photos of Keith Webb's Mercedes parked outside a private aviation terminal. Garrett Callahan looked up from his cluttered desk. 67 years old, silver hair, cropped military short, still built like someone who'd spent 3 decades chasing federal corruption cases through back alleys and congressional offices. He'd worked Watergate too when I was still clerking for the D.C. Circuit. We'd coordinated on cases for 30 years. Coffee's fresh, he said, gesturing to a pot on a filing cabinet. You're going to need it. I poured a cup. Sat in the metal folding chair across from his desk. Ita Vanessa Harrington, Garrett said, sliding a printout across the desk. That name mean anything to you? I looked at the document. First Caribbean International Bank, Grand Cayman. Account opened 18 months ago. Primary holder Vanessa Harrington. Current balance after multiple transfers $890,000. Vanessa, not Roxanne. Roxanne's legal first name, I said. She goes by her middle name. Smart, Garrett said. Makes the account harder to trace in routine searches. Brent's name appears nowhere in the records. No co-owner, no beneficiary designation, nothing. $890,000. More than double what had been stolen from our accounts. Which meant Roxanne had been running other schemes, draining other victims. Keith Webb. Garrett continued pulling up another document. Booked a one-way flight to London Heathrow. Departs Friday morning 6th, 15 a.m. first class, paid cash. Friday, 2 days from now. How long before Webb realizes the doctor's about to flip? I asked. Garrett tapped another printout. Dr. Marcus Reeves scheduled a meeting with criminal defense attorney Philip Chen tomorrow, Thursday, at 10 a.m. Chen specializes in federal plea deals. Once Chen files notice of cooperation with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Webb will know. My guess he runs immediately. 48 hours, I said. Maybe less, Garrett said. Once that lawyer files notice of cooperation, Webb's gone. I stared at the flight manifest. Keith Webb. Seat 4A. One way to London. My hands steadied on the printouts as the 48-hour countdown clicked into place. 2 days to stop a man who'd had 18 months to prepare his escape. The surveillance on your house, Garrett said. Private investigator named Marcus Donnelly, former MPD, now freelance. Roxanne hired him through a shell company 3 days ago. He's been logging your movements, reporting back twice daily. I know, I said. I've been giving him a consistent routine to report. Garrett smiled. The same tight smile he used to wear when witnesses realized they'd been caught. Figured you had. Donnelly's predictable. Stays at the same post, same hours. Not the sharpest tool. What else? Roxanne met Webb at his office for 93 minutes yesterday, Garrett said. Left at 7:18 p.m. looking agitated. Webb stayed another 2 hours lights on in his office until 9:30. My guess they're coordinating the endgame. Getting their stories straight before Webb flees. I nodded. Took the surveillance photos. Webb's Mercedes, the flight manifest, the Cayman banking records. Thank you, I said. You planning to stop him? Garrett asked. I met his eyes. I'm planning to expose everything before he boards that plane. I left Garrett's office at 5:47 p.m. Drove home through rush hour traffic, sat in my Georgetown study waiting. The phone rang at 9:04 p.m., Wednesday. 7 days since the first silent call. I answered without speaking. Are you all right? Francis's voice. Not breathing this time. Actual words. Clear. Controlled. Her voice unmistakably Francis's voice. The cadence I'd known for 46 years cut through the line for the first time since her supposed death. I'm reading the verdict, I said. Our code from 40 years of her prosecutor trials meant I understand the full picture. Heath Webb, she said. 3 syllables, precise. Don't let him leave the country. 23 seconds since the call connected. She was counting. Worried about wiretaps. I won't, I said. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness of my study phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. She'd spoken. Confirmed she was alive. Confirmed she was monitoring my investigation. Knew about Webb's flight. Knew I needed to act. The second Wednesday call. Last week, 47 seconds of breathing. This week, 23 seconds, 4 sentences. She was getting bolder. Or more desperate. Or both. I set the phone down. Opened my laptop. Pulled up Keith Webb's office address from Garrett's surveillance log. Webb left his building at 5:47 p.m. every day. Always alone. Always taking the Capitol Beltway exit toward his Potomac estate. Tomorrow was Thursday. The day Dr. Reeves would meet his criminal defense attorney at 10 a.m. The day the doctor would start negotiating his plea deal, would start cooperating with federal prosecutors, would start giving up names, including Keith Webb's. Once that cooperation agreement hit the U.S. Attorney's desk, Webb would know. Would accelerate his escape. The Friday morning flight would become Thursday night. Or Thursday afternoon. I had 48 hours. Maybe less. I pulled up the contact for Elaine Torres, a state litigation attorney I'd worked with on 3 cases during my tenure on the bench, now semi-retired, but still taking select matters. Typed a message, need emergency filing. Estate fraud forged, will offshore accounts. Can you meet Thursday 2 p.m.? Sent. Opened my notebook. Wrote day 7. Second Wednesday, call 23 seconds. Francis confirmed alive monitoring progress. Webb flight Friday 6th, 15 a.m. Dr. Reeves meeting attorney Thursday 10 a.m. Must move before cooperation agreement filed. I looked at Garrett's surveillance log again. Webb's daily routine. 5:47 p.m. departure. Capitol Beltway, Potomac Estate. Tomorrow, I would need to be faster than a man who'd spent 6 years learning everything I'd taught him about federal procedure. Faster than a man who'd already betrayed me once. And I would need to do it in the 48 hours before he disappeared into London, with $890,000 and no extradition treaty. 48 hours to stop Webb wasn't enough time to build a legal case. But it was enough time to make Roxanne panic. And panic, in my experience, created mistakes. Thursday afternoon, I walked into First National Bank Georgetown to set a trap. I slid a cashier's check for $50,000 across the polished desk, telling Thomas Hayes, bank officer and 20-year acquaintance, to open a new account under the name Arthur Bennett Trust. Revocable, knowing Roxanne's private investigator would find it within 48 hours. Thomas Hayes looked at the check, then at me. 58-years-old Georgetown resident who'd processed my accounts since he started at First National in 2003. We'd served on the same neighborhood watch committee for a decade. Revocable trust, he said. Not a question. An observation. Yes, I said. Warren revocable trusts show up in standard asset searches. If you're trying to protect assets, you want irrevocable. I want it visible, I said. Someone needs to find it. Thomas studied me for 3 seconds. Long enough to understand this wasn't normal estate planning. long enough to decide he didn't need to know why. "All right," he said. "Arthur Bennett Trust. Revocable. You're listed as grantor and trustee. This'll flag in the system by Saturday morning. Anyone running a financial background check will see it." "Good on," I said. I wasn't just investigating anymore. I was actively setting a trap, using a fake vulnerable trust account as bait to provoke Roxanne into committing a documentable crime. $50,000 from savings Francis and I had kept separate from our joint accounts, money Brent didn't know existed, money that would look like hidden assets I was trying to protect. When Roxanne's investigator discovered this account, she would do exactly what she'd done with our joint accounts. Try to access it. Try to add herself as trustee or authorized user. Try to drain it before I could stop her. Except this time, Thomas Hayes had already alerted the bank's fraud prevention team. This time, every access attempt would be logged, recorded, documented. This time, her illegal action would be caught in real time. "You need anything else?" Thomas asked, sliding the account documents across the desk. I signed where indicated. "How quickly can someone query this account?" "Once it's in the system tomorrow morning at earliest. Saturday for sure." "Thank you, Thomas." I left the bank at 2:47 p.m. Drove home through Georgetown's afternoon traffic. The Arthur Bennett Trust sat in the system now like a lure in dark water waiting for the predator to strike, and I had 48 hours to watch the line go taut. The call came at 8:02 p.m., Brent's voice, tenser than our previous conversations. The manufactured casualness gone, replaced by something that sounded like genuine stress. "How's the moving coming? You need to make progress." I stood in my Georgetown kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, looking out at the October darkness settling over the backyard. "What, I need more time," I said. "My health." "You need to sign voluntary transfer paper before Friday, or we'll file for guardianship." Voluntary transfer paper, guardianship filing, legal terminology Brent would never use naturally. The precise phrasing of someone reading from a script Roxanne had written. I let the silence stretch, counted to 5. "Friday," I said. "That's very specific. The estate attorney says we need to move quickly. For tax purposes." "Tax purposes." Another scripted line. Roxanne was accelerating her timeline. She'd found the Arthur Bennett Trust, was panicking, pushing Brent to speed up the guardianship threat, to force me into signing away control before I could protect the assets she thought I was hiding. Brent's voice carried Roxanne's cadence, her vocabulary, her control, and for the first time, I heard my son not as an adversary, but as a hostage reading someone else's ransom note. "I'll think about it," I said. "Dad, this isn't." I said, "I'll think about it, Brent." I ended the call, stood in the kitchen for 30 seconds processing. Roxanne knew about the bait account. Had to know. The guardianship threat was too precise, too urgent. She'd discovered the Arthur Bennett Trust and was rushing to secure it before I moved it somewhere she couldn't reach, which meant the trap was working, which meant I had less than 24 hours before Friday. I opened my laptop, checked email. One new message from Thomas Hayes, time-stamped 7:43 p.m. Subject line, Arthur Bennett Trust Inquiry. I opened it. "Warren, someone called at 4:17 p.m. today, asking to verify the Arthur Bennett Trust account existence, claiming to be you. Used your name, date of birth, and social security number. Standard verification protocol. We confirmed the account exists per policy, but did not provide balance or access information. Per your earlier instructions, I've flagged this inquiry and CI'd our fraud prevention team. Let me know if you want to discuss." Thomas, 4:17 p.m. 3 hours after I'd opened the account. 17 minutes before Brent's scripted call. Roxanne hadn't waited 48 hours. She'd moved in 3. Her investigator must have run a routine asset search that afternoon, found the Arthur Bennett Trust flagged in the system, and immediately called to verify. used my personal information, which she had access to through Brent, through our family records, through years of being inside our lives. She'd taken the bait, called the bank, confirmed the account existed, then immediately called Brent to deliver the new script signed by Friday, or we file for guardianship. I forwarded Thomas's email to Garrett with a single line, "Document everything." Sent a copy to Elaine Torres' illegal account inquiry. Need this admissible. Stood at my kitchen counter, laptop, open phone beside it, calculating. Thursday, 8th, 14 p.m. Friday deadline in less than 16 hours. Webb's London flight in 34 hours. Dr. Reeves's attorney meeting already past 10 a.m. this morning, which meant the cooperation agreement was probably being drafted. Right now would be filed tomorrow morning, would alert Webb by tomorrow afternoon. Everything was accelerating. Roxanne knew about the bait account. Webb knew the doctor was flipping. Frances was monitoring from wherever she'd hidden herself, waiting for the moment when all the evidence converged. And I was standing in my Georgetown kitchen at 8:14 p.m. Thursday night, watching 46 years of marriage and 44 years of fatherhood collapse into a 16-hour window where I had to choose between my son and justice. The choice wasn't hard. I'd made it the moment I opened the notebook on day one. Roxanne had taken the bait in 3 hours. Now I needed to make sure the trap closed before she realized what I'd done. Friday morning, I drove to Chevy Chase to secure my first cooperating witness. I sat across from Dr. Marcus Reeves in Daniel Pryor's conference room, while the doctor's criminal defense attorney slid a manila folder across the table, containing screenshots of text messages from V. Harrington. Time-stamped 3 weeks ago, the exact day Frances Bennett was admitted to Cedar Heights. Daniel Pryor, 42 years old criminal defense specialist, who'd made his name getting white-collar defendants immunity deals in exchange for testimony against bigger fish. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of attorney who understood that cooperation was often the only life raft in a federal prosecution. Dr. Reeves looked smaller than he had at Sunrise Recovery Center. 55 years old, the attending physician who'd signed Frances's fraudulent death certificate now sitting hunched in his chair like a man who'd spent 2 weeks waiting for the knock on his door that would end his medical career. My client will testify to the extortion, the falsified death certificate, and the body swap coordination, Daniel said. In exchange, we want written immunity from civil liability. I opened the folder, read the first message. From V. Harrington, sent September 1st, 2023, 7:43 a.m. Sign it, or I send the 2019 file to medical board tomorrow morning. September 1st. The morning Frances checked into Cedar Heights. Before she'd even settled into her room, Roxanne had already been extorting the doctor, who would eventually sign her fake death certificate. The body swap wasn't opportunistic. It was premeditated. She sent that message the morning Frances Bennett checked in, Dr. Reeves said. Voice quiet. Defeated. I had 18 hours to decide. The 2019 file, I said. What was it? Curtis slid another document across the table. Medical malpractice case summary. Patient death following post-surgical complications. Dr. Reeves had made judgment calls that were defensible but questionable. The kind of gray area that would destroy a medical career if someone framed it correctly to the Maryland Board of Physicians. She knew exactly how to weaponize gray areas, I said. Dr. Reeves said. Walk me through what she asked you to do, I said. Dr. Reeves's hands shook as he scrolled to the second message on his phone, the one Roxanne sent after he signed the false death certificate, thanking him for his cooperation, with the casual cheerfulness of someone who had just run a routine errand, which made my stomach turn. She told me Eleanor Price would die within 72 hours, Dr. Reeves said. Terminal lung cancer. When she died, I was to sign the death certificate listing her as Frances Bennett. Age, physical description, medical history. She gave me everything I needed to make it look legitimate. And Frances, I asked, would be transported out of the facility before the death was reported. I never asked where. Roxanne said the less I knew, the safer I was. Why did you reach out now? I asked. Curtis answered. Keith Webb booked a one-way flight to London. My client realized Webb was cutting loose ends. When the conspiracy unravels, the doctor who signed the fraudulent death certificate becomes the most convenient scapegoat. I can get you immunity from civil liability, I said. But I need everything. Dates, communications, who knew what when, and you'll testify. Dr. Reeves nodded. I'll testify. I left Daniel Pryor's office at 11:33 a.m. with a manila folder full of extortion messages and a cooperating witness secured. By 3:00 p.m., I was sitting in Elaine Torres's DuPont Circle office, watching my estate litigation attorney finalize the legal trap. Elaine Torres, 63 years old, semi-retired after 35 years of probate litigation, silver hair pulled into a professional bun, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents with the precision of someone who'd spent decades finding loopholes in wills and trusts. I'd worked with her on 3 federal circuit cases. When I'd texted her Thursday night asking for emergency help, she'd responded in 4 minutes. 2 documents, Elaine said, sliding them across her desk. First formal will contest based on undue influence and forgery. I've already filed it with the probate court. Second, new durable power of attorney with a very specific clause. I read the POA. Standard language until clause 17. Freiner. Any attempt to add an authorized user to grantor's trust accounts without written signature within the next 48 hours shall constitute criminal fraud and trigger immediate law enforcement notification. The POA clause makes any unauthorized access attempt a criminal act, Elaine said. Not just civil fraud, criminal. The DA's office is ready. I coordinated with them this morning. When does it trigger? I asked. The moment Roxanne or anyone acting on her behalf tries to access that Arthur Bennett trust account, Elaine said. We've got 48 hours live on the trap. After that, the clause expires and we file standard probate litigation. How many hours until Roxanne takes the bait and reaches for that trust account? Not knowing each keystroke builds her indictment. Webb's flight, I said. Elaine pulled up a timeline on her laptop. He'll head to Dulles Friday night. If Roxanne moves on the account Friday evening, the DA can coordinate with airport security trap Webb at the terminal while simultaneously arresting Roxanne for the account fraud. If Roxanne moves on the account Friday evening, the DA can coordinate with airport security, trap Webb at the terminal with the warrant while simultaneously arresting Roxanne for the account fraud. Simultaneous pressure. No time for them to coordinate stories. No chance for Webb to disappear. Perfect amount, I said. Elaine handed me a sealed envelope. DA trigger protocol. Don't open until arrest. Inside are the activation codes for the account monitoring system and the coordinated warrant timeline. I took the envelope, felt the weight of it. Paper and ink that would end Keith Webb's escape and Roxanne's conspiracy in one coordinated strike. Check my watch, 3:47 p.m. Friday. Webb's escape window was closing fast. The Arthur Bennett trust trap was live. Dr. Reeves was cooperating. The DA was coordinated. All I needed now was for Roxanne to do exactly what she'd done for the last 18 months, reach for money that wasn't hers, and assume a 72-year-old retired judge wouldn't be 3 moves ahead. The trap was live. Webb's flight left in hours. All I could do was wait for Roxanne to make her move. I drove home Friday evening, set my phone on silent, and slept for the first time in 3 days. At 7 a.m. Saturday morning, I pulled into the lowest level of the Tyson's Corner parking garage where Colleen Walsh waited beside a concrete pillar, holding an envelope twice as thick as the previous 211 handwritten pages from a woman who had been dead for 3 weeks. The underground garage was empty except for Colleen's silver Honda and my car. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Concrete pillars cast long shadows. Colleen wore jeans and a dark jacket, hair pulled back, eyes that had seen too much in the weeks since Francis's supposed death. She handed me the envelope without speaking, heavier than the others. I felt the pages inside. She wrote this in April, Colleen said. 6 months before Cedar Heights. She knew what Brent was planning before he did. April. 6 months before Francis checked into Sunrise Recovery Center. 6 months before the body swap. 6 months before the 4:17 a.m. call that shattered my bedroom silence. Francis had known. I opened the envelope. 11 pages in Francis's careful handwriting. Blue ink. Dated April 3rd, 2023. Warren, if you're reading this, Colleen has determined you've gathered enough evidence to understand what I'm about to explain. I discovered Brent searching for real estate lawyers in March. He thought I was napping. I watched him through my bedroom window, standing in our driveway on his phone, practicing what to say to me. Practicing his concerned son voice before coming inside to ask about my health. I knew then what Roxanne had convinced him to do. I read standing beside my car. Colleen waited 10 feet away, giving me space. Francis described the weeks that followed. How she'd hired a private investigator in April to confirm Brent's contacts with estate attorneys. How she'd discovered Roxanne's DOJ background, her expertise in civil fraud, her ability to weaponize legal procedures. How she'd realized that Roxanne wasn't helping Brent solve his debt problems, she was orchestrating the theft of our assets using Brent as an unwitting instrument. Page 3 detailed Francis's counterplan. Contact Colleen Walsh in May. Verify Colleen's trustworthiness, her willingness to help, her understanding of medical procedures and documentation. Build a relationship carefully over weeks until Colleen agreed to coordinate the body swap. Page 4, Eleanor Price. I met Eleanor on June 8th at Cedar Heights. During a routine checkup I scheduled specifically to scout the facility. Terminal lung cancer, 6 weeks remaining, no family visiting. We talked for 3 hours that first day. She was 71 years old, had spent her life arranging things for other people, and wanted her death to matter. I explained what Roxanne was planning. Explained what I needed. Eleanor said yes immediately. My hands stopped on page 6, where Francis described watching Brent through her bedroom window in July, practicing his concerned son voice in the driveway, before coming inside to ask about her health. The same observation from April repeated months later, Brent still rehearsing the role Roxanne had scripted for him. Page 7, Eleanor's consent. Eleanor Price wanted her death to matter. She gave me her consent in writing notarized, dated June 14th. Her attorney witnessed it. She understood completely what we were planning. She would die as herself, be cremated as me, and her death would expose a conspiracy that would have succeeded if I'd simply died naturally and let Roxanne take everything. Pages 8 and 9 detailed the technical coordination. How Colleen would ensure Eleanor's body was processed correctly. How Dr. Reeves would be compromised by Roxanne's blackmail, making him sign the false death certificate under duress. How Francis would disappear before Eleanor died, leaving no overlap, no chance of being seen. Page 10 explained the timing. I don't want you to save me, Warren. I want you to build an ironclad case. If I appear too early, Roxanne claims I'm an imposter. Claims the cremation proves Francis Bennett is dead. Destroys everything we've worked for. But if you gather evidence, first prove the forgery, prove the theft, prove the conspiracy, then my appearance becomes undeniable proof that they attempted murder. Page 11. The final page. Single paragraph. You don't need to save me. I just need you standing there when I walk into the room. I need you to have built the case so perfectly that my resurrection doesn't create doubt, it creates certainty. Colleen will know when the timing is right. Trust her judgment. Trust the evidence you've gathered. Trust that I've been watching your progress through every envelope, every call, every step. The final page had a single postscript in different ink added later. If you're reading this, Colleen knows when I'm ready. Trust the timing. She's been watching, I said, looking up at Colleen. Every step, Colleen confirmed. I report to her twice weekly. She knew when you found the tremor in the signature, knew when you opened the bait account, knew when Dr. Reeves agreed to cooperate. She's been orchestrating your investigation from the beginning, Warren. You weren't rescuing her. She was staging her own resurrection. I folded the 11 pages back into the envelope, got into my car. Colleen walked to her Honda without another word. I sat in the driver's seat for 15 minutes, windows fogging with my heart beating steadily for the first time since the 4 a.m. call 10 days ago. 46 years of marriage. Frances had known me well enough to predict every move I'd make. Had known I would open the notebook, would analyze the signature, would find the missing tremor, would build the case methodically, brick by brick, exactly as I'd done from the federal bench for 35 years. She hadn't orchestrated her disappearance to escape. She'd orchestrated it to trap Roxanne and Webb so completely that their own actions would build the evidence against them. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Garrett, 2 from Elaine Torres, 1 text from Thomas Hayes, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. Friday. Account access attempt, logged 11:47 p.m. Friday, police notified per protocol. The trap had closed while I slept. Somewhere in the city, Frances was watching the news, waiting for Colleen's signal that the evidence was complete, waiting for the moment when she could walk into a courtroom and prove she'd been dead for 3 weeks, but alive enough to destroy the people who'd tried to erase her. Frances had orchestrated everything. The Friday trap had closed. Now I needed to watch the final pieces fall into place. Saturday afternoon, I positioned myself in First National Bank's lobby to witness Roxanne's mistake. I sat in the First National Bank Georgetown lobby at 2 p.m. Saturday afternoon, behind a spread newspaper watching Roxanne Harrington walk through the brass doors alone. No Brent, no attorney, just a leather folder and the confidence of someone who believed she was about to access $50,000. Thomas Hayes stood behind the counter. We'd coordinated this morning. He knew exactly what to do. Roxanne approached the counter, placed the leather folder on the marble surface, smiled. "Good afternoon," she said, professional tone, pleasant. "I'm here regarding the Arthur Bennett Trust account." Thomas pulled up the account on his screen. "How can I help you today?" "I'm listed as his primary caregiver," Roxanne said. "I need authorization added to manage his trust accounts. Mr. Bennett's health has declined significantly, and we need to ensure proper financial oversight." She slid documents across the counter. Power of attorney forms, caregiver authorization requests, all listing her legal name, Roxanne Harrington. Not Roxanne Thayer. Not Roxanne Bennett. Roxanne Harrington, the exact name on the Cayman account. V. Harrington. Vanessa Harrington. Her legal first name that she never used socially, kept buried for exactly this purpose. Financial crimes under one name, family life under another. She'd just connected herself to every offshore transaction, every illegal transfer, every piece of the conspiracy. Chattiks. "I'll need Mr. Bennett's verified signature on the authorization form," Thomas said. Calm, professional, reading from the script Elaine had prepared. "In person. He's not well enough to come to the bank," Roxanne said. "That's why I have the medical power of attorney." "I understand," Thomas said. "But for changes to trust beneficiary status, we require in-person signature verification." Bank policy. Roxanne's jaw tightened. Barely visible, just a flicker. "This is a routine caregiver authorization," she said, voice still controlled. "Not a beneficiary change." "The Arthur Bennett Trust is structured as a revocable trust," Thomas said. Any authorization to access the account constitutes a potential beneficiary modification. I'll need to speak with Mr. Bennett directly to process this request. Roxanne's hand rested on the counter where Francis had signed documents for 43 years, where trust was currency and family meant protection. Now the marble was an evidence collection surface, every word recording into the district attorney's archive. Through cameras Thomas had activated the moment Roxanne walked in. "I'll be back with Mr. Bennett," Roxanne said. "Of course," Thomas said. "We're here to help." Roxanne gathered her documents, turned, walked out through the brass doors without looking back. I waited 60 seconds, folded my newspaper, pulled out my phone, texted Elaine, "We have enough to arrest now," sent a second message. "Wait until Monday. I want her in that room." Elaine's response came in 10 seconds. "Understood. Monday 2 p.m. probate hearing, everything in place." Roxanne's attempt to access the Arthur Bennett Trust was now documented, recorded, witnessed. Criminal fraud in real time captured on bank security footage monitored under DA warrant. She'd taken the bait perfectly. Before I tell you what happened at Dulles Airport that Sunday morning, drop a comment, should Warren arrest Roxanne immediately or wait until Monday's courtroom confrontation for maximum impact? Choose A or B and tell me why in 5 to 10 words. Quick note, the next part includes some fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. Sunday morning, 6 a.m., Keith Webb arrived at Dulles International Airport for his London flight. Garrett had coordinated everything through his federal contacts. No arrest warrant that would have required immediate charges and given Webb's attorneys time to intervene. Instead, administrative passport hold. A bureaucratic flag that gave us 2 hours to convert it into something permanent. I waited in the observation area. Couldn't see the security checkpoint directly, but Garrett was feeding me updates by text. 5:47 a.m. Webb checked in, heading to security now. 5:53 a.m. at checkpoint. 5:58 a.m. flag triggered. My phone rang at 6:02 a.m. Garrett. "On Webb's in holding," he said. "You've got 2 hours to get that court order filed." "Elaine's standing by," I said. I called Elaine. She answered on the first ring. "File it," I said. "Already walking into the courthouse," Elaine said. "Judge Morrison is waiting. Emergency Sunday session. I'll call you back in 20 minutes. At the security checkpoint, Robert Hendricks, federal agent, mid-40s, Garrett's contact from the Homeland Security Coordination Task Force, was executing the passport hold with perfect bureaucratic precision. "Sir, there's a flag on your passport," Hendricks said to Webb. Professional tone. No emotion. "You'll need to step aside while we verify." Webb's boarding pass fluttered to the security checkpoint floor, his one-way ticket out of the country, as Hendricks's hand closed around his passport. "This is a mistake," Webb said. "I travel internationally frequently. There's no flag on my passport." "The system shows a verification hold," Hendricks said. "Please step this way." Webb was escorted to a holding room. Not arrested, not charged, just detained for administrative verification while his London flight boarded without him. Elaine called back at 6:23 a.m. "A motion submitted," she said. Judge signed the material witness detention order at 6:19 a.m. Webb's not going anywhere. The administrative passport hold had just become a federal material witness detention. Keith Webb couldn't leave the country. Couldn't flee to London with no extradition treaty. Couldn't disappear into offshore accounts and new identities. By Monday morning, he'd receive a formal court subpoena, compelling his appearance at the probate hearing. I stood in the Dulles observation area at 6:47 a.m., watching British Airways Flight 216 taxi toward the runway. Seat 4A empty. Keith Webb sitting in a federal holding room 200 yards away, still believing this was a passport system error that would be resolved in hours. He didn't know yet that the administrative hold was permanent. Didn't know that his former mentor had spent 10 days building a case so airtight that even attempting to flee had become evidence of consciousness of guilt. My phone vibrated. Text from Colleen. She's ready. Monday 2 p.m. probate hearing courtroom 7. Francis will walk in after opening arguments. 36 hours until the dead woman returned. 36 hours until Roxanne Harrington sat in a courtroom watching Francis Bennett, woman she'd tried to erase, woman whose body she'd cremated, woman whose estate she'd stolen, walk through the door and reclaim everything. I sat in the Georgetown garden at 9 p.m. Wednesday night, fallen October leaves collecting around the wrought iron bench, phone in hand, counting the minutes until Francis's third call. The first two had lasted 23 seconds and 41 seconds, respectively. Tonight would tell me if she was gaining strength or simply running out of warnings. The phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Warren. Her voice sounded different this time, stronger, with an edge I recognized from 43 years of marriage. 4 minutes. Listen carefully. My hand trembled slightly. 4 minutes. More than 5 times longer than the previous calls combined. Roxanne hired someone, Francis said. A private investigator named Daniel Cross. He's been following you since last Thursday. Silver Toyota Camry license plate starts with JKL. He photographed you at the bank Monday, at the courthouse Tuesday, at Rock Creek Park this morning. I processed this information quickly. Does she know where you are? No. Cross is good, but not that good. I've been careful. A pause. Vivian is bringing you my diaries tomorrow. Rock Creek Park, the bench near the Shakespeare statue, 2 p.m. She photocopied the relevant pages September through early October. They document everything Roxanne said during those visits. Every threat, every lie about my mental state, every attempt to manipulate me into changing my will. Francis, let me finish. 3 minutes left. Her breathing quickened slightly. Brent will come to you Sunday evening. He's frightened. Roxanne promised him $250,000 if he testified I was incompetent. But now he knows about Keith Webb's arrest, and he's panicking. He'll confess part of it, not everything, but enough. Don't trust him completely, but don't reject what he offers. The October wind scattered more leaves across the garden path. Somewhere in Georgetown, my wife was alive and orchestrating her own resurrection from a location I still couldn't pinpoint. So Monday at 2 p.m., probate hearing courtroom 7. Francis continued. Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Colleen will handle the opening arguments. She'll challenge the will on procedural grounds. First establish the forgery evidence, introduce the diary entries. Roxanne will feel confident. Then I walk in. I imagined that moment. Roxanne's face when she saw Francis alive. 1 minute, Francis said. I love you. This ends Monday. Trust Garrett, trust Colleen, trust the evidence. And Warren, when this is over, we're taking that trip to Ireland you've been postponing for 20 years. The line went dead at exactly 4 minutes, 12 seconds. I sat there holding the phone for another 10 minutes before standing up. Daniel Cross in a silver Camry. I'd been so focused on building the case that I hadn't considered Roxanne might be building one against me. Thursday at 2 p.m. I arrived at Rock Creek Park early, confirmed the Shakespeare statue bench was clear, then waited. Vivian appeared at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio. She looked older than I remembered, 16, with the same curly dark hair and careful eyes I'd come to rely on, but she had Francis's cheekbones and the same deliberate way of choosing words. Grandpa. She handed me the portfolio without sitting down. These are photocopies. Mom kept the originals in a safe deposit box I didn't know existed until last week. She planned this carefully. I opened the portfolio. Francis's handwriting filled page after page, dated entries from September 8th through October 3rd, documenting 11 visits from Roxanne. I recognized the pattern: immediately escalating pressure, veiled threats, attempts to convince Frances she was confused about financial matters. September 15th entry. Roxanne said if I don't change the will to give her controlling interest in the trust, she'll have me declared incompetent. She used those exact words. Then she smiled and asked if I wanted more tea. October 1st entry. She brought paperwork today. Brent witnessed it. He wouldn't look at me. I signed a grocery list instead and switched the papers when she left the room. She never noticed. My hands are steadier than she thinks. Thank you, I said quietly. Vivian's eyes were wet. I should have visited more if I'd been there in September. She didn't want you there. She needed Roxanne to feel safe to keep making mistakes. I closed the portfolio. This documentation is perfect. It establishes premeditation pattern of conduct, everything Colleen needs. Yeah, Mom asked me to tell you something else. Vivian's voice dropped. She said the hardest part wasn't faking her death. It was letting you grieve alone. But if she'd told you earlier, your reaction wouldn't have been genuine, and Roxanne would have known something was wrong. She left before I could respond. Sunday evening at 6 p.m. My doorbell rang. Brent stood on the porch, looking 20 years older than his 59 years, holding a manila envelope. Can I come in? I stepped aside without speaking. He walked to the living room, but didn't sit. I need to tell you something. About Mom's will. About what Roxanne asked me to do. I'm listening. She told me Mom was getting confused, forgetting things that we needed to protect her from making bad financial decisions. The words came quickly rehearsed. She said if I testified that Mom seemed disoriented during those September visits, she'd give me enough to finally pay off the Virginia Beach restaurant debt. $250,000. And you agreed. I thought I was helping. His voice cracked. Then I heard about Keith Webb's arrest Friday. Roxanne called me 17 times this weekend. She's panicking. She told me to leave town, to not answer any subpoenas, to... He stopped. I can't do this anymore. Brent set the manila envelope on the coffee table. That's a cashier's check for $340,000. Everything I have. And a letter apologizing for what I almost did. I don't know if it helps your case, but I wanted you to have it before tomorrow. He walked toward the door, then paused. Roxanne's dangerous. She knows everything is falling apart. Be careful tomorrow. After he left, I opened the envelope and read the 2-page handwritten confession. It wasn't complete. He carefully avoided admitting he knew the will was forged, but it documented Roxanne's promises, the $250,000 offer, her instructions to lie about Frances's mental state. I sat in the living room as sunset faded to darkness, holding my son's confession and wondering if different parenting 20 years ago would have prevented him from ever making this choice. Monday morning, I folded Brent's confession into my briefcase beside the diary photocopies and arrived at Elaine Torres's DuPont Circle office at 8:45. The weight of 2 weeks pressed against my chest, 14 days since Frances's staged death. 14 days of building evidence while grieving a woman who was still alive somewhere in this city. The conference room door opened at 9 a.m., and Roxanne Harrington entered, first spine straight navy suit, pressed the confidence of someone who believes she's attending a formality before inheriting $750,000 from a woman she helped cremate alive. She chose the seat directly across from where Elaine would sit, positioning herself as the primary beneficiary, the rightful heir. Brent arrived 2 minutes later, wearing the same gray jacket he'd worn to Frances's funeral. He sat 3 chairs away from Roxanne, not beside her. She noticed, but said nothing. Elaine entered, carrying 2 leather portfolios and a stack of file folders that she arranged with deliberate precision. A notary sat at the end of the table. A woman I didn't recognize took the corner seat and identified herself as Catherine Wells, Assistant District Attorney, Eastern District of Virginia, observing under court order. Roxanne's eyes flickered toward the DA representative for half a second before returning to neutral. This proceeding is called to address the last will and testament of Frances Eleanor Bennett, deceased October 12, 2023, and the contest filed by Warren Bennett's surviving spouse, Elaine said. Her voice carried the flat authority of courtroom procedure brought into corporate conference space. The door opened again. Keith Webb entered, escorted by a federal officer in plainclothes navy blazer radio earpiece hand resting near his belt. Webb wasn't walking in freely. He was being delivered. Roxanne's composure faltered for exactly 2 seconds. Her shoulders tensed. Her breathing quickened, then she smoothed everything back into place. But I'd seen it the moment she realized her co-conspirator wasn't maintaining silence by choice, but by federal compulsion. Webb placed a manila file on the table without looking at Roxanne and sat in the chair farthest from everyone. You didn't have to come," Roxanne said quietly, leaning slightly toward him. Webb's jaw tightened. "I didn't have a choice." Elaine opened the first portfolio. "We'll begin with the contested, will dated October 7, 2023, submitted to probate by Mrs. Roxanne Harrington. The document purports to grant Mrs. Harrington full control of the Arthur Bennett Memorial Trust and all associated assets. Mr. Warren Bennett contests this will on multiple grounds: forgery, undue influence fraud, and conspiracy to commit estate theft. She placed the will on the table between us. I'd seen it before, Frances's signature shaky, in a way her handwriting had never been, the witness signatures too perfectly aligned. Before we examine the signature analysis and witness testimony, Elaine continued, I'd like to introduce evidence regarding financial motive. She opened the second portfolio and removed a document bearing the seal of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. Roxanne's breathing changed. I heard it across the table, a slight hitch quickly controlled. Account holder Vanessa Harrington, Elaine read. Opened March 2022, Grand Cayman. Current balance as of October 23, 2023, $890,000. Authorized signatories Vanessa Harrington. No co-owners listed. She placed the bank statement on the table. Yeah, I don't know anything about a Cayman account, Roxanne said immediately. This is fabricated. Statisticum. The account was verified through UK-US mutual legal assistance treaties, Elaine replied. The Cayman Monetary Authority provided complete transaction records under court order. The deposits began in April 2022, 18 months ago. Small transfers, initially larger amounts after January 2023. Brent stared at the document. His face had gone pale. Elaine continued placing papers on the table: wire transfer receipts, deposit slips, account opening documentation, bearing a signature that matched Roxanne's passport. To note the authorized signatories, Elaine said quietly. Vanessa Harrington, singular. No joint account holders, no beneficiaries listed. Brent's hand trembled slightly against the table edge. He was reading the documents now, really reading them, seeing his name absent from every page. Webb's hands shook as he opened his manila file, and for a moment Roxanne's mask cracked, not fear of Elaine or the DA representative, but fear of what Webb might say without her controlling the script. She'd counted on his silence, bought it with promises and threats, but material witness detention had stripped that certainty away. I watched my son process the revelation in real time. The Cayman account Roxanne had opened alone. The $890,000 she'd accumulated while he sold his Virginia Beach restaurant to pay their debts. The absence of his name from every signature line. She'd convinced him to betray his mother, to lie about Frances's mental state, to stand by while a forged will redistributed family assets. and she'd planned to take everything and leave him with nothing. The chair scraped against polished wood, such a small sound in a 12-person conference room, but I measured it precisely. 5 centimeters. The distance Brent shifted away from Roxanne, a physical gap that represented 14 months of marriage, discovering it was built on debt-blind eyes and mutual betrayal that turned out to be entirely one-sided, Roxanne noticed. Her hand reached toward him instinctively, then stopped halfway across the space between their chairs. Brent said nothing. He stared at the Cayman account documents and kept his hands folded in his lap, no longer touching hers, no longer bridging that 5-centimeter distance. Elaine reached for a second folder, this one marked with evidence tape and a case number. Death certificate fraud. Dr. Reeves' testimony was printed across the tab in capital letters. She placed it deliberately in front of Keith Webb. Webb looked at the folder, then at Roxanne, then back to the folder. His throat worked as he swallowed. The DA representative leaned forward slightly, pen ready. Webb opened his mouth to speak. The conference room door opened. Frances Bennett walked in, wearing the gray wool coat I'd bought her for our 45th anniversary, alive and solid and real, and every sound in the room stopped. Frances stood in the doorway for 3 seconds that stretched into geological time. Then Elaine Torres, 32 years of courtroom discipline overriding shock, returned her attention to the contested will and traced her finger down page 3 to a single phrase embedded in paragraph 7. Was hereinafter referred to as the primary beneficiary. Elaine read aloud. Her voice cut through the frozen silence like a scalpel opening skin. This phrase appears nowhere in modern legal drafting, nowhere in standard estate templates from the last 2 decades, nowhere except Judge Warren Bennett's work from 1985 to 2004. She placed the will flat on the conference table so everyone could see the underlined text. I stared at those 4 words and felt 35 years of bench experience crystallize into certainty. I'd used that exact construction herein after referred to as in hundreds of documents during my early career. It was an archaism even then, lifted from a legal writing manual published in 1963 that my first mentor had given me. I'd stopped using it after attending a judicial drafting seminar in 2005 that advocated plain language over legal flourishes. Only one person had absorbed that phrase by working directly under me during those specific years. I stood slowly and looked across the table at Keith Webb. His hands were folded in front of him, knuckles white against the dark wood. "Keith," I said quietly, "who taught you to use that phrase?" Webb stared at the table. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. "Answer the question," Catherine Wells said from her corner seat. The DA representative leaned forward slightly, pen poised. Webb's silence expanded to fill the room. Denial would have been safer. He could have claimed coincidence, parallel construction, standard legal language. But the phrase was too specific, too personal, too obviously mine. And 35 years of legal training wouldn't let him compound forgery with perjury in front of the man who'd taught him that law was built on precision and truth. I sat back down. Silence at the right moment speaks louder than any testimony. 35 years on the bench had taught me that a man's refusal to answer is itself a confession. Elaine placed a second document beside the Willa clerk's memorandum from 1992 bearing Webb's signature, and the same phrase hereinafter referred to as the successor trustee. "Still your fingerprint," she said simply. "Unconscious habit formed during your clerkship, present in the fraudulent will drafted to steal Frances Bennett's estate." Roxanne's breathing had become audible short, controlled the sound of someone calculating rapidly shrinking options. "I'll contest every piece of this manufactured evidence," Roxanne said. Her voice rose sharply, professional veneer cracking. "You can't prove Keith wrote anything. You can't prove—" "I would like to hear it from the beginning," Frances said. Her voice cut through Roxanne's protest with the controlled prosecutor tone I'd heard for 30 years in courtrooms across Virginia. Frances stepped fully into the conference room, Colleen Walsh beside her, and every head turned. She wore the navy blue suit from her law school graduation, the one from the photograph that had sat on our mantel for 46 years, the one she'd worn the day she passed the bar in 1978. The jacket was slightly loose now. She'd lost weight in the past 2 weeks. But the suit was unmistakable. Roxanne knew that suit. I watched recognition cross her face. She'd seen the photo album, had probably studied every image of Frances while planning how to erase her. And now the woman in the photograph from 48 years ago stood alive in front of her. Frances walked to the empty chair beside mine and sat down with the same deliberate precision she'd used for 4 decades of legal practice. She looked around the table slowly, at Elaine, at Catherine Wells, at Keith Webb with his trembling hands, at Brent, sitting 5 centimeters away from his wife, at Roxanne, whose mouth had gone slack. "The part about my will," Frances continued calmly. "I would like to hear how it was written, who witnessed it, and what happened to the body that was cremated in my name on October 14th. Elaine stared at Frances for a long moment. "Mrs. Bennet, you're present." "I am," Frances said. "And I would like these proceedings to continue. Please read the contested will from the beginning." Brent made a sound, halfway between a sob and a laugh. He was staring at his mother as if she were a ghost made solid. And perhaps she was. Resurrection is indistinguishable from haunting when the dead refuse to stay buried. Roxanne found her voice. "This is impossible. You're the death certificate Dr. Reeves confirmed." Dr. Marcus Reeves confirmed the death of a woman brought to Georgetown Medical Center on October 12th, Frances said. "He did not confirm her identity. That was established by you, Roxanne, when you identified the body as me. Would you like to revise that identification now?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Catherine Wells was writing rapidly. The federal officer standing behind Keith Webb shifted his weight slightly, hand moving closer to his radio. Frances folded her hands on the conference table, exactly where they'd rested for 43 years of legal practice left over. Right fingers interlaced, positioned at the precise angle that allowed her to read documents while maintaining eye contact with witnesses. "Ms. Torres," Frances said, "please place the will in front of me. I would like to read what I allegedly signed on October 7th. Elaine slid the document across the polished wood. Roxanne's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Her face had gone the color of paper, all animation drained away, leaving only the terrible recognition that the woman she'd orchestrated to murder was now sitting 3 feet away, asking to read her own forged will. Frances picked up the document and began reading with the same methodical attention she'd given to trial transcripts for 3 decades. Her eyes moved steadily down the page, absorbing the signatures, the witness attestations, the clauses that redistributed her estate to the woman who'd tried to erase her. I watched my wife of 46 years examine the paperwork of her own planned death. And I saw the prosecutor I'd fallen in love with in 1977 return to full power. Frances finished reading the forged will in silence, then set it down with the same deliberate care she'd used closing case files for 30 years. She opened a manila folder I hadn't seen before. One Colleen must have brought, and removed a document bearing a notary seal. "Eleanor Price signed this consent on June 14, 2023, Frances said. Her voice had shifted completely into prosecutor mode, controlled, precise, building a case not for sympathy, but for conviction. She had 6 weeks to live. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, no treatment options remaining. She wanted her death to expose fraud, not enable it. She placed the consent agreement on the table. Eleanor's signature was shaky but legible, witnessed by her hospice nurse and a notary public. "I met Eleanor through the Georgetown Widows Support Group in May," Frances continued. She was 73 years old, childless, with no surviving family. When I discovered Brent had been researching real estate lawyers who specialize in contesting wills, this was early June, I knew someone was planning to challenge my estate. The search history on our shared family cloud account showed 11 different law firms reviewed between May 20th and June 8th. Brent's face went ashen. He hadn't known about the shared cloud backup. Francis laid out 3 more documents in sequence: Brent's browser history, print out a timeline of Roxanne's visits to our Georgetown house during September, and a folder marked with evidence tape. On June 20th, Roxanne visited me and mentioned casually that she'd heard estate taxes could consume 40% of inheritances if the paperwork wasn't structured properly. She offered to introduce me to Keith Webb, who could help with tax optimization. That was when I knew. She opened the evidence folder and removed a series of text message screenshots. Roxanne sent this text to Dr. Marcus Reeves at 6:47 a.m. October 9th, sign it. Or I send the 2019 file to medical board tomorrow morning. Francis read the words without inflection. The file referenced Dr. Reeves's prescription record discrepancies from 4 years ago, minor documentation errors that could be interpreted as controlled substance violations if presented maliciously. Roxanne had been collecting leverage. James Crawford leaned forward from his position beside Catherine Wells. Crawford was younger than I'd expected, maybe 42, with wire-rimmed glasses and the focused intensity of a prosecutor who'd built his career on financial fraud cases. He'd introduced himself quietly when Francis first sat down, identifying himself as the assistant district attorney handling the conspiracy prosecution. "This is extortion documented in writing," Crawford said. "Threatening a licensed physician to falsify a death certificate." "Yes," Francis agreed. "Dr. Reeves came to me on October 10th, 2 days before Eleanor died, and confessed everything. He thought he had no choice. I told him he had exactly one choice: sign Eleanor's death certificate accurately when she passed, then cooperate fully with the authorities I was bringing into this investigation." She placed another document on the table. A handwritten affidavit from Dr. Reeves dated October 10th, detailing Roxanne's threats and the planned body swap scheme. Roxanne sat frozen. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, but she said nothing. Chiku. Eleanor died at Georgetown Medical Center at 11:23 p.m. on October 12th. Francis continued. Dr. Reeves signed her death certificate as Eleanor Price, cause of death pancreatic cancer. Roxanne identified the body as me. The cremation proceeded under my name on October 14th, and the will was submitted to probate on October 16th. Francis looked directly at Keith Webb. "A will you drafted using the legal phrasing Warren taught you 32 years ago. A will with my forged signature that transferred my entire estate to the woman who orchestrated my murder." Webb wouldn't meet her eyes. Brent was staring at the evidence spread across the conference table: 6 months of preparation, counter-surveillance, documented consent, witness affidavits. His mother had built a prosecution case against his wife, while letting him believe she was vulnerable and confused. He turned to James Crawford. "I want a deal." 4 words that hung in the air like a son's epitaph the moment he chose self-preservation over the wife who'd chosen nearly $900,000 over him, over everyone. Roxanne stood abruptly. "I'm leaving to consult with my attorney. You can't keep me here." "No one is detaining you," Elaine said calmly. Roxanne grabbed her purse and walked toward the conference room door. She opened it and stepped into the hallway. 2 federal agents stood waiting. "Roxanne Harrington," the woman on the left said. She was in her mid-30s, dark suit, FBI credentials clipped to her belt. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Foster. This is Special Agent Michael Russell. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of elder financial abuse, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to file a fraudulent death certificate. She held up the warrant so Roxanne could read it. Roxanne didn't scream or cry. She stood perfectly still as Foster took her purse, and Russell produced handcuffs. The metal closed around her wrists with a sound I remembered from 35 years on the bench, metallic final, the click that separates before from after. As they turned her toward the elevator, Roxanne looked straight at me through the open doorway. Our eyes met for perhaps 2 seconds. Then she leaned slightly in my direction as Foster guided her past. I thought you were too old," she whispered. I stepped closer, keeping my voice equally quiet. "That was your most expensive mistake." Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe that she'd gambled on age being weakness and lost everything on that single miscalculation. She'd seen a 71-year-old retired judge and a 69-year-old former prosecutor and mistaken decades of legal expertise for vulnerability. The agents led her to the elevator. The doors closed. I watched the floor indicator descend, 3rd floor, 2nd floor lobby, gone. When I turned back to the conference room, Frances was pouring tea from a carafe someone had brought in. Her hands were perfectly steady. The navy suit jacket hung on the back of her chair. Brent sat with his head in his hands across from his mother, who was legally dead, but measuring Earl Grey into white porcelain cups. James Crawford was speaking quietly with Keith Webb near the window. Catherine Wells had her phone out, coordinating with someone. Elaine gathered documents into organized stacks. Frances set 2 teacups on the conference table where the forged will still lay steam rising in the quiet room. She looked at me across the space we'd shared for 46 years, and I realized this was the first moment in 3 weeks we'd been truly alone together, in any way that mattered. Everyone else was background noise. The tea was ready, and my wife, who died 3 weeks ago, was waiting for me to sit down. Frances and I sat across from each other at the conference table drinking tea without speaking for 20 minutes, not from having nothing to say, but from having 46 years of things to say, with 3 weeks of grief between us and no idea where to begin. Eventually, Colleen knocked, and the moment passed into logistics, legal procedure, and the machinery of resurrection. 2 days later, Patricia Price stood in our Georgetown living room, holding a photograph of her mother Eleanor at age 40, the same woman whose body had been cremated under Frances's name 3 weeks ago. Patricia was 53, a respiratory therapist at Richmond General, with her mother's bone structure and the careful posture of someone who'd spent decades managing other people's breathing crises. She wore dark blue scrubs under a gray cardigan, having driven straight from her morning shift. "I didn't know she was sick," Patricia said quietly. "I called her October 8th, and she said everything was fine. 6 days later, a hospice called to say she'd passed through an attorney I'd never heard of." Frances sat beside me. "Your mother came to the Georgetown Widows Support Group in May. She told me about you Richmond General twin daughters in college. She didn't want to burden you with her diagnosis." That sounds like her," Patricia said. "She arranged her entire funeral when I was 12. Prepaid, everything picked, the music, wrote instructions for her book collection. She always prepared for other people's needs before they knew they needed help." She set the photograph on the coffee table between us. "I need to understand why she would agree to this. Because she didn't want to die anonymously with no purpose," Frances said. "She had 6 weeks left when we met. She wanted those weeks to matter. She signed consent forms independently through her own attorney," I added. "A deliberate choice made freely." Patricia absorbed this slowly. "To help you catch someone stealing your estate." "More than that," Frances said. "Eleanor told me she'd spent 73 years caring for others. Dying alone felt like all that care disappeared without a trace. This way, her death exposed criminal conspiracy and protected people. It mattered." I placed an envelope on the table beside the photograph. The corrected death certificate. Eleanor Margaret Price, 71 years old, pancreatic cancer, died October 12th. Survived by daughter Patricia, no longer unclaimed, no longer anonymous. Patricia's fingers traced where her mother's real name appeared in official type, as if bureaucracy had finally corrected its erasure of Eleanor's existence. Frances handed her a second envelope. The Eleanor Price Memorial Fund, established at Richmond General for patients without nearby family during extended treatment. Your mother wanted to help people. This seemed like the smallest possible thank you. Patricia left 30 minutes later carrying the corrected certificate, the memorial papers, and her mother's photograph. We watched her silver Honda disappear. She needed to know her mother chose it, Frances said quietly. Yes, I agreed. She did. 2 days later, Friday morning, I sat in the DA's waiting room while Brent signed his plea agreement down the hall. 5 years probation, full restitution, 500 hours community service at Cedar Heights Elder Care Facility, 5-year bar from financial advisory work. I didn't enter the conference room. I waited among metal chairs and outdated legal journals, listening to muffled voices through closed doors. 35 minutes later, Brent stepped out and stopped when he saw me. We hadn't spoken since the Monday confrontation. He looked thinner, older already, carrying the weight of 5 years probation before it had started. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I stood. We faced each other across the industrial carpet of a government hallway, where 35 years ago I'd walked as a newly appointed federal judge. Now I stood here as a father watching his son accept criminal sentencing. I extended my hand. Brent stared at it for 2 seconds, then reached out. His hand felt like river stone pulled from cold water, solid, real, but carrying the temperature of something submerged too long in places without warmth. His grip was uncertain, neither strong nor weak. Just there. I held it longer than a normal handshake. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement that he was still breathing. Still my son in the biological sense. Still someone I had to decide whether to continue being a father to. Good, I said. That would take longer than either of us has. He nodded once and walked toward the parking garage elevator, shoulders bent under weight that wouldn't lift for years. I stood alone and looked at my own hand, the same hand that held his when he was born 59 years ago, that taught him to throw a baseball that had just shaken his for the first time during this entire crisis. Frances was waiting in the car outside. I hadn't yet decided what the handshake meant. I walked back to the car and told Frances about the handshake. She listened without speaking, nodded once, and said nothing the entire drive home. Sometimes silence is its own answer. Sunday afternoon, 20 days after the 4 a.m. call, Vivian sat beside me on the Georgetown garden bench. October had turned the leaves fully reds and golds scattered across the brick path where I'd waited through 3 Wednesday calls. She wasn't carrying evidence this time. Just a question. Do you regret it, Grandpa? 16 years old, curly dark hair in a ponytail, wearing a Georgetown sweatshirt that was probably her father's from 30 years ago. Regret what specifically? All of it. The trap. Watching agents handcuff Dad's wife. Staging Grandma's death. Making Dad choose between testifying and prison. She pulled her knees to her chest. Do you regret it? Vivian deserved a real answer, not a comfortable lie. I regret not doing this sooner, I said finally. But I couldn't, I didn't know yet. The moment I knew I stopped regretting action and started regretting delay. Will Grandma forgive him? Ask her yourself. We sat quietly. A jogger passed. Somewhere down the block, someone raked leaves with the steady scrape of metal tines against brick. Grandpa, Vivian said quietly. Can you teach me the law? I looked at her. Really looked. 16, with curly hair like her father had at that age, but with something in her eyes Brent had lost somewhere along the way, the willingness to ask hard questions instead of accepting comfortable lies. Why? Because I watched you build that case in 2 weeks. I watched Grandma come back from the dead and prosecute her own murder. I watched evidence matter more than money. She faced me directly. I want to learn how to make truth win. All right, I said. Next week, we start with evidence. Her face brightened for the first time since the confrontation. She left 20 minutes later, and I sat alone until the October sunset turned the Georgetown brick the color of ember. Monday evening, 21 days after Francis's staged death, we sat together for dinner at the kitchen table for the first time since October 11th. Roasted chicken with rosemary green beans, mashed potatoes with real butter. The same Friday meal she'd made every week for 46 years, as though 3 weeks of death and resurrection hadn't happened between. We ate without speaking for the first 10 minutes. Finally, Frances set down her fork. How many pages did you write? 37, I said, handing her the leather notebook. She flipped through slowly. Page 8, Wednesday call analysis. Page 14, Cayman account discovery. Page 31, Brent's confession letter. Page 37, Roxanne's arrest. She closed it and set it between our plates. You missed a page, Frances said. Which one? Her smile broke across her face like light through a window, shuttered for 3 weeks. Unexpected, transformative, the first smile in 21 days. It felt like watching spring arrive in November. The page for forgiveness, she said quietly. I stared at the notebook. 37 pages of evidence investigation prosecution. Nothing about what comes after conviction. I don't know what that page says yet, I admitted. Neither do I. Her smile didn't fade. But we should probably start it anyway. She pushed the notebook toward me. I opened to page 38. The blank page felt heavier than the previous 37 combined. I wrote one word in block letters at the top: forgiveness. Frances reached across and took my hand. The same hand that had held our son's cold grip 2 days ago, that had answered her 4 a.m. call, that had held hers for 46 years of marriage, that now included staged death and family betrayal. She squeezed once. We sat in the kitchen where she'd planned her resurrection, eating Friday dinner on Monday evening, holding hands across evidence notebooks and dinner plates, beginning the slow work of deciding what forgiveness actually means when the person who needs it most is your own child. I told Vivian I'd teach her evidence law, I said. Frances nodded. Good. She'll be better at it than Brent ever was. Yes, I agreed. She will. The chicken was perfect. The green beans were slightly overcooked, exactly as Frances always made them. The mashed potatoes had real butter and too much salt, exactly right. Page 38 sat open between us, one word written at the top, and 46 years of marriage quietly deciding what comes next. Page 38 stayed blank, except for that single word, for 3 days before Frances wrote beneath mine a question mark. Then I added a date. She added a name. Slowly, quietly, we began filling the page together. 6 weeks later, on a December morning in Georgetown, I found the sentencing article on page 8 of the Washington Post, not page 1, not above the fold. Just 12 lines between a Metro Transit story and a restaurant review. Roxanne Harrington, 7 years federal prison, across 4 counts of elder financial abuse. Keith Webb, 3 years permanent disbarment. Dr. Marcus Reeves, 5 years probation voluntary medical license surrender. Brent Bennett Conditional Probation Restitution Community Service. I read it in 45 seconds, folded the paper beside my coffee cup, and turned to the crossword puzzle. Page 8, Frances called from the kitchen. Page 8, I confirmed. 12 lines. Between transit and restaurants. She appeared in the doorway holding wheat toast. Good. That's exactly where it belongs. She was right. The conspiracy that had consumed 21 days of our lives now occupied middle-page news while our routines resumed their quiet authority. One down, 5 letters, PROOF. That first Wednesday of December, I read case briefs while Frances read a biography of Thurgood Marshall. Rain fell steadily on the roof, the same sound it had made the night of her 4 a.m. call 8 weeks ago. At 9 p.m. exactly, my phone sat dark on the nightstand. No vibration, no unknown number, no breathing through a burner connection. Frances lay 30 centimeters away, close enough that I could hear her turn pages. "You prepared very thoroughly," I said. She didn't look up. "I married a judge. I knew how thoroughly I had to prepare." The Wednesday silence rang louder than any call ever had. The next morning, we drove to Elaine Torres's DuPont Circle office through light December snow. Vivian met us in the lobby wearing a dark blue dress, carrying the evidence textbook I'd given her the previous week. Elaine's conference room looked different without federal agents, just the 4 of us, morning light, coming through windows overlooking the circle where traffic moved in its endless rotation. The Eleanor Price Scholarship Fund. Elaine said, placing the document before us. "Upon both your deaths, the Georgetown property converts to scholarship assets full tuition assistance for Washington, D.C. law students with demonstrated financial need, administered through Georgetown University Law Center in perpetuity. Likely sustaining 50 to 70 years based on current valuations." Frances signed first strong and clear. I signed second. Elaine notarized. Then Vivian stepped forward. "My first time witnessing a real will," she said, her hand moving carefully across the witness line. Vivian Bennett witnessed December 7th, 2023. I watched her signature appear and thought, this is what the forged will could never do. Roxanne's fraud would have redistributed existing wealth stolen. It converted decades of work into her personal account. But this built a future. Students not yet born would attend law school because of this document. Eleanor's death, Frances's resurrection, the entire conspiracy's exposure would generate opportunity for people who didn't yet exist. Vivian set down the pen. "Evidence lesson still scheduled for Saturday. Grandpa, 9 a.m., I confirmed. "Bring the textbook. We're covering chain of custody." I walked to the window. December snow fell heavier now, covering DuPont Circle in white that would melt by afternoon, but looked clean in this moment. Frances joined me, legally alive again after 8 weeks of being officially dead. Our new will sat witnessed and notarized behind us, signed by our granddaughter, who would learn law the right way with evidence thoroughness and the knowledge that justice requires patience. Frances took my hand. Ready to go home. I looked out at the snow covering Georgetown, at the city where we'd lived 46 years. Yes, I said. Let's go home. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I could have confronted Roxanne immediately when I found that forged will. I could have called police, demanded answers, let anger drive my choices. But 35 years on the bench taught me that justice built on emotion collapses. The hardest lesson. Sometimes those you raised are the ones you must investigate most carefully. Don't make my mistake of trusting blindly just because someone shares your name. This story isn't just about family justice, it's about refusing to let age become weakness. Roxanne underestimated us because we were 71 and 69. She mistook retirement for incompetence. But experience is evidence and patience is power. I believe God put me through this trial to show that elders deserve protection, not exploitation. When you face family justice situations, remember, document everything, trust your instincts, and never let anyone make you feel too old to fight back. Dad's revenge stories like mine matter because they prove wisdom doesn't retire. It simply chooses its battles more carefully. If this story resonated with you, I'd appreciate your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Would you have done anything differently in my position? If you know someone facing similar family justice challenges, please share this with them. Dad's revenge stories help others recognize warning signs early. And if you'd like more stories like this, please subscribe to Wise Revenge. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. I know this story was long, but some truths can't be rushed. One final note: while this account is based on real events, certain details and dialogue have been recreated or fictionalized for narrative purposes. The core lesson that age is not weakness and thoroughness wins remains unchanged.